A wounded Apache warrior lay sprawled across the scorching sands of the Arizona desert, his breath shallow, his body trembling from pain and exhaustion. Ayani's chest heaved as he tried to rise, every movement sending sharp stabs of agony through the arrows embedded in his shoulder and thigh. His hands were smeared with blood, and his once pristine leather tunic was torn and stained from a knife wound across his side. He had been attacked, ambushed by shadows that had appeared without warning, and now the vast, empty desert stretched endlessly around him, offering no comfort, no protection, only the harsh, unyielding silence of the wilderness. Yet, despite the searing pain, Ayani forced himself to focus. He knew that surviving this night wasn't just about saving his own life. The safety of his people, the honor of his tribe, and the fragile balance between his homeland and the settlers' territory depended on him. Every instinct that had been honed from years of living off the land and defending his people screamed at him. Move, survive, endure. The desert beneath him was riddled with hazards. Sharp rocks jutted from the sand like skeletal fingers. Loose stones threatened to betray his every step, and the chill that settled in as the sun began to dip behind distant cliffs whispered of the unforgiving night ahead. Ayani's mind raced as he examined the scene. Footprints marred the soft earth uneven, and desperate evidence of his attackers' fleeting presence. They had come with speed and precision, leaving behind no trace of horses or wheels, only the marks of careful tracking designed to confuse anyone who might follow. He traced the disturbed sand with his fingers, noting the direction, the spacing, the pattern. Every detail could be a clue. Someone had plotted this ambush meticulously. But why and who? Pain gnawed at him with every heartbeat, yet a sharper edge of fear pressed into his thoughts. Whoever had orchestrated this attack was not merely interested in killing one Apache warrior. No, this was part of something larger. The questions burned hotter than the sun above. Was this an attempt to ignite a conflict between his tribe and the settlers? Was there a hidden hand pulling strings from the shadows, manipulating both sides for a gain? Only they understood. Ayani's mind whirred with possibilities, everyone darker than the last. Despite his injuries, he moved with careful precision, crawling to a small natural depression that offered a momentary shield from the wind and the eyes of any distant observer. His fingers brushed against the sand, testing the ground for stability, noting every pebble and crevice. The desert had become both ally and enemy, its vast emptiness concealing dangers as easily as it could provide cover. Each gust of wind carried a whisper of uncertainty, and the stark, angular silhouettes of distant mesas seemed to loom with silent menace. Ayani paused, pressing his hand to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart through the pain. Survival was not guaranteed, but neither was defeat. The knowledge that someone somewhere wanted him dead only strengthened his resolve. He knew that if he fell here, the story of the ambush, the truth behind the bloodshed, and the fragile hope for peace between two worlds might die with him. Somewhere beyond the horizon, he sensed the tremor of a larger plane, a conflict that had been quietly engineered, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt. And now, wounded and alone, he had a choice: succumb to the desert and fade into a forgotten tragedy, or summon the courage, cunning, and sheer willpower to survive, to reach those who could uncover the truth. Ayani lifted his head, his dark eyes scanning the barren expanse, every muscle tensed with determination. The desert held its secrets tightly, but he would not. In that suspended moment, the audience feels the pounding tension, the raw peril of survival, and the gripping curiosity. Who orchestrated this attack? What stakes lie hidden in the sands? And will this wounded warrior endure long enough to reveal the truth that could change the fate of two nations? The desert's silence presses on as Ayani drags himself forward, each agonizing step a testament to his unyielding spirit. Ayani dragged himself across the uneven desert floor, each movement sending jolts of pain through his battered body, until a faint glimmer of smoke caught his eye in the distance. It rose gently from behind a low ridge, barely visible in the fading light, and yet It carried a promise, shelter, water, and perhaps someone who could help. With painstaking effort, he pushed forward, his strength almost gone, until he reached a modest stone dwelling built into the hillside. There, standing at the doorway, was Eliana, a solitary settler who had made this hidden corner of the desert her home. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of the wounded Apache, yet there was no fear, only recognition of someone in desperate need. Without hesitation, Eliana helped Ayani inside, guiding him to a small bed lined with thick blankets. She moved with calm efficiency, assessing his wounds, cleaning the arrow shafts and knife cuts with care. "You're lucky to have made it here," she murmured, her voice steady but laced with concern. Ayani, too weak to argue, allowed her hands to work, noting the precision in her movements. She was skilled, someone who had lived through hardships of her own, someone whose knowledge of medicine and survival rivaled the desert itself. As Eliana treated him, Ayani explained the attack, each word dripping with urgency. The ambush, the arrows, the knife, wounds, they were not random acts of violence. Someone had orchestrated this, and the implications were far-reaching. Eliana listened intently, her brows furrowing as she processed the story. Then, with deliberate care, Ayani opened a small leather pouch and withdrew a bundle of documents. "These," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "show who is really behind the attacks. The raids on both our people, they are being manipulated." Eliana leaned closer, scanning the papers. Names, dates, payments, witness testimonies. Each page painted a chilling picture. A third party had been engineering a conflict between the Apache and the settlers, turning neighbor against neighbor, manipulating fear and vengeance for their own gain. Mineral-rich lands, strategic routes, and lucrative claims hung in the balance, and hundreds of lives teetered on the edge of a war that should never have existed. Ayani's jaw tightened as he spoke of his father, the hidden leader of their tribe, who had been quietly collecting evidence of the conspiracy, moving in shadows to safeguard the truth. The knowledge that his father was alive, risking everything for justice, strengthened Ayani's resolve, despite his injuries. Outside, the desert seemed to respond to the tension inside the small dwelling. A sudden gust of wind whipped across the dunes, carrying with it the first hints of a sandstorm. The air thickened, and distant rumbles of thunder hinted at rain yet to come. Eliana's eyes darted toward the horizon. "We'll need to move soon," she warned. The storm would provide cover, but it would also make travel treacherous. Each step outside the shelter risked detection, yet they both knew that staying put meant certain death if the attackers returned. Their escape would require careful timing, trust, and a willingness to act without certainty. Ayani's thoughts turned to his people, to the settlers' families who could be caught in the crossfire, and to the fragile balance of honor and justice that must be preserved. He realized that the courage to survive alone was meaningless if it could not serve a greater purpose. Eliana, understanding his resolve, offered a hand and a plan. Together they could navigate the desert, evade the pursuers, and deliver the truth to those who could act. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Ayani and Eliana prepared to leave the shelter, each aware of the risks ahead. The desert was vast, the enemies relentless, and the stakes higher than either had faced before. Yet in that moment of shared purpose, a quiet understanding passed between them. Honesty, courage, and responsibility were more than ideals. They were weapons stronger than any sword or arrow. And as the storm began to swirl around them, Ayani felt a spark of hope, even in the harshest wilderness, guided by truth, and trust there was a path toward justice and peace. The desert stretched endlessly before Ayani and Eliana, the fading light casting long shadows over the jagged terrain. The canyon of the painted rocks lay ahead, a place both beautiful and perilous, where a meeting that could prevent a war was set to take place. Each step was a test of endurance. Ayani's wounds throbbed with every movement, yet he refused to let pain dictate his pace. Eliana led the way, her eyes scanning the rocky paths for signs of danger, her instincts honed from years of solitude in this harsh landscape. They mounted a chestnut mare, hidden in a secluded corral, the animals sensing their urgency and moving with quiet determination. The rocky terrain threatened to throw them at every turn. Loose stones skittered beneath the hooves, sharp outcrops tore at the leather reins, and narrow passes demanded careful navigation. Ayani pressed himself against the mare, feeling the rhythm of its strides beneath him, each movement a reminder of how fragile life could be in the hands of the desert. Their journey was not unobserved. Somewhere behind, distant hoofbeats echoed faintly through the canyons. Hunters, mercenaries, or spies, their identities remained uncertain, but their intent was clear. They pursued Ayani with relentless precision, desperate to intercept the documents and silence the truth. Every sound became a threat, every movement a potential ambush. Eliana's mind worked as swiftly as the horse's hooves carried them. She led Ayani along paths that twisted through crevices and behind rock faces, creating illusions of escape and using the canyon's natural defenses to their advantage. As the miles passed, the tension between them evolved into a quiet understanding. Ayani's dark eyes, sharp with alertness, met Eliana's gaze more than once, and a mutual respect blossomed from necessity. They were bound together, not by friendship, not yet, but by shared purpose and trust forged in life and death circumstances. Ayani fought an internal battle, suppressing the exhaustion and pain that threatened to slow him, while Eliana balanced caution with courage, knowing a single misstep could spell disaster. The storm that had begun as a whisper in the desert grew into a tangible force, rain mixing with sand wind battering their faces. Visibility shrank, trails became muddled, and the world around them blurred into shades of ochre and gray. Yet the peril only sharpened their focus. They relied on instinct knowledge of the land and each other's presence. Ayani, despite the blood loss and fatigue, refused to reveal vulnerability. Eliana, despite her own fears, navigated with precision, her hand occasionally brushing his as she steadied the reins, a subtle reminder that he was not alone. Moments of silence punctuated by the distant thunder made the canyon feel alive with anticipation. Every bend could hide danger. Every crest could reveal pursuers. Ayani's thoughts kept returning to the stakes of their mission. The documents he carried could prevent the eruption of violence between his tribe and the settlers. Failure was not an option. Yet the desert seemed determined to test their courage, forcing each step to be a negotiation with death itself. As they neared the mouth of the canyon, the landscape shifted redstone walls, rising like guardians, enclosing them in a labyrinth of natural fortresses. The enormity of what awaited pressed on them should either side discover the full extent of the conspiracy before the meeting bloodshed could be unavoidable. Their pace slowed, hearts pounding, but determination burned brighter than fear. Ayani and Eliana had survived ambushes, storms, and the treacherous desert. Now each step brought them closer to a confrontation that could define the future of two peoples and the fragile trust that had begun to take root between them. In that moment, the desert felt both a crucible and a guide testing their limits while preparing them for the high-stakes gamble ahead. The Canyon of the Painted Rocks loomed just ahead, a place of color, history, and danger, where courage, cunning, and trust would be the only tools capable of altering the course of a conflict poised on the edge of catastrophe. The Canyon of the Painted Rocks rose before Ayani and Eliana like a fortress of living stone, its walls streaked with ochre, crimson, and gold. Here, the fragile thread of peace would be tested. Ayani dismounted cautiously, supporting himself against the jagged rock as his eyes scanned the gathering before him. On one side stood his Apache brethren, their faces painted with traditional markings, weapons sheathed, but ready eyes wary and searching for signs of betrayal. On the other side, the settlers' representatives, led by the few who could still be trusted, shifted uneasily, rifles slung at their shoulders, hands resting near trigger guards, suspicion radiating from every posture. Ayani's body ached, every wound a reminder of the danger that had brought him here, but he squared his shoulders, letting the weight of responsibility settle upon him. In his hands rested the leather satchel that contained the evidence, the documents that could unravel the web of lies set to ignite a war between two peoples who had lived side by side for generations. Stepping into the open, Ayani placed the satchel carefully on the dusty ground directly between the two groups and looked up. His voice clear and unwavering despite the pain cut through the tense air. Everything you believe about the attacks, the raids, the burned homesteads, the stolen livestock. They are lies, he said. Someone has manipulated both sides. Someone outside our communities wants us to destroy one another for their gain. He opened the satchel, revealing the carefully preserved documents. Names, dates, and payments detailed how false witnesses had been bribed to cast blame on both the Apache and the settlers. He read aloud each word, heavy with the weight of truth. John Morrison received $50 to claim he saw tribal markings at the Simpson Farm attack. Margaret Crane, $30 to identify Apache warriors at the burned trading post. On our side, Robert Longknife was paid to report settlers attacking where none were present. Mary Crow Feather falsely testified to soldiers destroying grain stores. The reactions were immediate and visceral. Faces once hardened with suspicion twisted into confusion, shock, and disbelief. Fingers clenched, jaws tightened. Eyes darted from one side to the other, searching for confirmation for some thread of betrayal. Ayani's chest heaved, not from exertion alone, but from the tension that crackled like electricity between the two groups. For the first time, they were not adversaries. They were witnesses to manipulation, each realizing they had been pawns in a larger, insidious game. A murmur swept through the settlers. Who could orchestrate this one? Called voice trembling with disbelief. Running Bear, Ayani's uncle and respected leader of the Apache Council, stepped forward, his gaze steady but wary. We feared our worst. When the attacks began, he admitted voice, carrying across the canyon, but now seeing this evidence. It is clear, neither side acted alone. We were deceived. The truth settled over the canyon like a storm, breaking the weight of past anger, slowly giving way to reason. Ayani gestured for both sides to examine the documents themselves. Look at everything, he urged. You have equal access to the same information. Judge for yourselves. Decide whether you will allow manipulation to dictate our fates. One by one, settlers and tribal leaders leaned forward, their hands brushing over the papers, faces shifting from doubt to horror, then to determination. Fingers pointed not at each other, but at the real culprits. A territorial development company intent on claiming mineral-rich lands, while two communities fought a war of their own making. The betrayal stung, but clarity emerged from the chaos. Slowly, dialogue began to replace suspicion. Questions were asked, answers were given. The Apache and the settlers found common ground in their outrage, their shared desire to protect their families and lands. Agreements were made on the spot joint investigation into the attacks, shared protection of disputed territory, and a commitment to transparency and communication. Ayani watched as old barriers of mistrust crumbled, replaced by cautious cooperation and mutual respect. Throughout it all, Ayani remained the pivot, the living bridge between worlds. His posture calm, yet resolute, and the deliberate care with which he presented each piece of evidence modeled the courage and integrity that would guide both sides forward. Eliana stood nearby, silent but vigilant, a reminder that wisdom and ingenuity often walked hand in hand with bravery. By the time the sun dipped low behind the canyon walls, casting long shadows over the assembled groups, a fragile but genuine accord had been reached. The settlers and the Apache, once poised for conflict, now saw each other as potential allies, their anger redirected toward the true threat, those who had sought to exploit them. The lesson was clear. Resonant cooperation, honesty, and dialogue could achieve what suspicion and violence never could. As Ayani took a moment to breathe, feeling the exhaustion of his journey and the triumph of this precarious peace, he allowed himself a quiet sense of hope. The canyon, painted in streaks of red and gold, became more than a landscape, it was a symbol. a testament to the power of courage, truth, and deliberate choice. In this place, enemies could become allies, misunderstandings could be corrected, and the foundation for lasting peace could be laid. The stakes had been life and death, the outcome a lesson for future generations. Ayani's heart, though battered, knew the path forward: vigilance, transparency, and trust. Only then could the hard-won harmony endure. As the sun rose over the canyon of the painted rocks, its warm light spilling across the redstone walls, a sense of calm settled over the assembled communities. The settlers and the Apache had come together in a rare moment of unity, signing an accord that would protect the land and their people. Where once suspicion and fear had dictated every interaction, now dialogue and understanding formed the foundation of a fragile but promising peace. The canyon itself, with its striking colors and ancient carvings, became a symbol of what could be achieved when courage and honesty prevailed over hatred and deceit. Ayani stood alongside Eliana, both of them, watching as their respective communities began to mingle cautiously, exchanging wary smiles and tentative gestures of trust. In these moments, the bond between them deepened, forged not only by shared danger, but by the mutual recognition of their values and determination. Ayani's leadership, tempered by his integrity, and Eliana's intelligence and compassion, had together bridged the divide between two cultures, long set apart by misunderstanding and mistrust. Their partnership represented more than personal connection. It embodied the possibility of reconciliation and cooperation across cultural lines. The young warrior reflected on the journey that had brought them here: the ambush in the desert, the relentless pursuit the nights spent in fear and uncertainty, and the treacherous path through unforgiving terrain. Every hardship had been a test not only of physical endurance, but of character judgment and the courage to act for the greater good. Through it all, Ayani had learned that heroism was not merely surviving or fighting. It was making difficult choices, staying true to one's principles, and putting the well-being of the community above self-interest. Eliana, too, realized the impact of trust and collaboration. Her willingness to aid a stranger, to risk her own safety in service of a greater cause, had not only saved a life, but it also played a pivotal role in preventing a conflict that could have cost countless lives. In this realization, the audience sees a reflection of timeless truths. Bravery and honesty can alter the course of history, and standing for justice often requires personal sacrifice. The documents that had nearly sparked a war now stood as evidence of what transparency and shared knowledge could accomplish. Misunderstandings and manipulations that once threatened to destroy lives had been exposed, creating a precedent for accountability. Both communities began to understand that dialogue, mutual respect, and the courage to face inconvenient truths were more powerful than weapons and suspicion. As Ayani and Eliana walked through the canyon together, their hands brushing occasionally, the canyon itself seemed to echo their resolve, an enduring testament to unity born from adversity. Their story, while rooted in the distant past, resonated with the present. It reminded everyone watching that conflicts can be mitigated, that collaboration across divides can lead to lasting harmony, and that individual choices, when guided by integrity, can ripple outward to shape entire communities. And so, as the wind stirred the red dust around them, and the first birds took flight across the canyon walls, a quiet sense of hope settled in. The fight for survival had become a fight for justice, and in the end, truth and courage had prevailed. If the story of Ayani and Eliana has inspired you, a voice would gently remind viewers: follow epic Western stories, share this tale, like, and comment below to explore more frontier stories full of bravery and humanity. Thank you for joining us on this journey.